The terminal smelled like recycled oxygen and something older, a low chemical sweetness the Varric used to mark conquered space, the way a wolf marks a tree. Dale had learned to breathe through his mouth in the first week. By the third, he barely noticed it anymore. That was the thing about occupation. You stopped noticing. That was how they got you. He stood at the edge of the transit atrium, hands loose at his sides, watching the crowd the way a fisherman watches water, not at the surface, but beneath it. The Varric relay station hung in geosynchronous orbit above what had once been called Sydney, which had once been called Earth, which had once been called home. Now it was called Processing Zone 7. The Varric had a gift for stripping the poetry out of things. Around him, 1,000 humans shuffled through the queues, with their transit chips held out, eyes down, moving in the specific way that people move when they have learned that stillness attracts attention. The teleportation bays lined the far wall, 18 arched chambers of violet light that could dissolve a person at the molecular level and reconstruct them anywhere within the Varric transit network, which sounded like freedom if you didn't know what the network connected to. Dale knew. He'd been here long enough to know. "You're going to scratch your own palm if you keep doing that," said a voice behind him. He stopped. He hadn't realized his thumbnail had been working at the scar on his left hand. The old one. From the first time he'd tried to take something that wasn't his, and someone had taken a blade to him for the trouble. He turned. Sura was leaning against a support column, arms folded, watching him with the particular expression she used when she was deciding whether or not someone was worth her time. She had pale hair she wore braided and knotted in a way that made her look like she was prepared for a fight. She usually was. "Marin wants to see you," she said. "I figured." He fell into step beside her. "The job?" "The job." They moved through the crowd with practiced ease, cutting angles, letting the flow of bodies work for them rather than against them. This was the thing about transit atria. Everyone was always moving, always distracted by their own terrifying futures, and in that collective distraction, there was space to be invisible. Dale had been invisible for most of his 26 years. He was getting good at it. Marin held court near the Eastern food concession, sitting at a table like he owned it, which in a functional sense he did. He was a big man, broader than the chair suggested he should be, with a tattoo along his throat that coiled like something alive. He dressed in the way that people dressed when they wanted to communicate that the rules applied to everyone except them. A layered coat over a jacket over a shirt. All different textures, all perfectly maintained. He had his coffee in one hand and someone else's transit chip in the other, and he was examining both with equal interest. Kale sat to his right, the small one, who was never as small as he looked. Thilo was standing, which he always did because he said chairs made him feel like a target. And across from Marin, frowning at a handheld device, was Wynne, who was the only one of them Dale actually liked. Dale sat down across from Marin without being invited. Marin looked up from the transit chip. "You're late," Marin said. "The queues were long." "The queues are always long." "That's not an excuse, it's a description." Marin set down the chip and the coffee and looked at Dale with the measuring look he'd been perfecting for years. "I've got something for you. An initiation job. I've done plenty of jobs. Not like this." Marin leaned forward. "There's a man in the transit atrium. Old, Varric-made coat, good boots. He came in on the early ferry from the surface relay. That's already unusual. The early ferry is usually cargo only. He's carrying a case, about this big." He held his hands apart. "He won't let it go, won't check it, won't set it down. Won't let anyone within 3 meters of it without watching them. So he's paranoid. So he's carrying something worth being paranoid about." Marin picked up his coffee again. "I want the case." Dale looked around the table. Kale was neutral, which meant he already had his opinion and wasn't sharing it. Thilo was watching Dale with the particular expression that meant he was calculating odds. Wynne was still looking at her device, but her jaw had tightened slightly in the way it did when she disagreed with something, and had decided not to say so. "Why me?" Dale asked. "Because you're new enough that the station security doesn't have your face yet. And because I want to see what you do under pressure." Marin smiled, and it was the kind of smile that communicated friendliness, and something beneath friendliness that was considerably less warm. Consider it a test. The man was easy to find. He was exactly what Marin had described. Old, precise, expensive in a quiet way, the kind of expensive that comes not from having money, but from having once had a great deal more of it. He sat in the waiting area near Bay 11, the case between his knees, one hand resting on top of it. His eyes moved across every face that came within range, and when they moved across Dale's face, Dale was already looking somewhere else. He circled once, twice. On the third pass, he got close enough to see the case clearly, matte black composite, sealed with a biometric lock, no markings. The kind of case you could buy from a Varric quartermaster, or from someone who had stolen it from a Varric quartermaster. The kind of case that said, "The contents matter more than the container." He moved in on the fourth pass, angled like he was heading for the concourse, bumped the man's shoulder, reached for the handle. The man's hand clamped onto his wrist. Not the hand on the case. The other hand. It moved so fast that for a moment Dale couldn't process what had happened. One moment he was reaching, the next he was caught, and the old man's grip was extraordinary, not panicked, not frantic, just absolutely certain, like a lock engaging. "Not today," the old man said quietly, and his eyes were very calm and very tired and very clear. Dale pulled back. The man let him go, without a scene, without raising his voice, without looking away. Dale walked to the concourse and kept walking until he was around the corner, where he stood against the wall and pressed his cut palm against his thigh and breathed. Wynne found him there. "That went well," she said. "He made me before I was within a meter. He made you before you were within 5. I was watching." She leaned against the wall beside him, not touching but close. "Marin's going to be upset." "Marin can be upset. Marin can also be considerably worse than upset, which I think is what you actually mean." She glanced at his hand. "You're bleeding. It's not from him. Old scar." He looked up at the transit bays, the violet light pulsing in its slow rhythm, the Varric bureaucrats moving through the space with their unhurried alien certainty. They were tall and pale carapaced, and they moved like water moving around stone, frictionless and patient. They had been patient for a very long time. "What do you know about the old man?" "More than Marin does." She said it quietly, checking the sightlines first. "His name is Oren Vasek. He was a relay technician before the occupation, one of the ones who designed the original teleportation architecture. The Varric kept him on because they needed someone who understood the human-built infrastructure. He's been working for them for 11 years. But he requested transit clearance to Varric Prime 2 weeks ago, and they denied it. And yesterday he requested emergency repatriation to the surface, and that was denied too. He's been on the station for 4 days, and he's carrying a case he won't give up." She looked at Dale sideways. "Whatever's in it, both sides want it. That makes it very valuable, and it makes him very dangerous to be near. You should tell Marin's to find someone else. I'm saying you should understand what you're involved in before you decide whether you're involved." The ferry announcement came over the speakers. Synthesized Varric tones, followed by the flat human translation, and Dale watched the crowd shift and reshape itself around the information. The morning ferry from the surface was delayed. All outbound transit suspended pending a security review. Please maintain your position in the designated waiting area. Thank you for your cooperation. The exit sealed with the soft sound of magnetic locks engaging. No one was going anywhere. The energy in the atrium changed in the way that energy changes in closed spaces when people realize they are closed. Not panic. Panic came later, if at all. First came the very particular stillness of people recalculating their situations. Dale had been present for 3 different Varric lockdowns in his life. He recognized the texture of the next few hours. Long and grinding and dangerous in small, unpredictable ways. He went back to Marin's table. Marin was not upset about the failed approach. He was something more controlled than upset, which was worse. "Everyone's locked in," he said. "Which means our friend with the case is also locked in. And so is whatever's inside it." He looked around the table. "Let's talk about how we spend the next several hours." The Varric security detail arrived 30 minutes later. 4 of them, which was unusual. Standard station security ran in pairs. 4 meant they thought they were looking for something specific. They moved through the atrium in a deliberate pattern, carapaces glinting under the transit lights, their scanner arrays sweeping at waist height. The humans in the waiting areas watched them with the practiced non-expression of people who had learned that expression was expensive. Dale watched them too. He watched them pass near Oren Vasek 3 times, and he watched Vasek each time. The infinitesimal tightening of the hand on the case, the careful absence of eye contact. Whatever the old man was carrying, the Varric were looking for something, and either they didn't know it was him or they couldn't prove it yet. "They're running biometrics on everyone," Kale said, coming back from a circuit of the atrium. "Bay 8 is processing. Queue's already 200 long. Which means it'll take hours to get through everyone," Thilo said. "Which means hours of chaos," Marin said. And something in his voice shifted into the gear that it shifted into when he saw an opportunity. Get me the case before the security sweep reaches him. Whatever's in it is worth something to someone. We figure out who and we broker the conversation. Dale looked at Wynne. Wynne was looking at her device. Wynne, he said. I heard. She didn't look up. I'm pulling the station schematics. There's a maintenance corridor behind Bay 11. It's not monitored because the Varric think the access codes were changed when they took over the station. She paused. They weren't. No one told the maintenance crew. She finally looked up. I can get us a back route to wherever we need to go. If we decide we need to go somewhere. We're going to need to go somewhere, Dale said. In the third hour of the lockdown, a man named Rhett arrived. Dale noticed him the way you notice a temperature change, not dramatically, just a shift in the atmosphere. Rhett moved through the atrium differently from the other humans. Not like the Varric, who moved with alien patience. More like someone who had made a series of very firm decisions a long time ago and was now executing on them. He was angular and intense, with the kind of contained energy that either meant exceptional discipline or a significant chemical assistance. He found a seat 3 rows from Oren Vasic and opened a book and began to read with the focused attention of someone who was not reading at all. That's not coincidence, Cale murmured at Dale's elbow. No, he didn't come in with us. He's not Varric. He wants the case. Third party, Dale said, which means there are at least 3 people in this room who want what the old man has, and only one of them is the old man. Cale was quiet for a moment. Marin's not going to like that. Marin didn't. But Marin was adaptable, which was the one quality Dale genuinely respected in him. The way you can respect a quality in a shark without admiring the shark. Marin listened to the new information and recalculated. He sent Sura to watch Rhett. He repositioned Thelo near the Bay 11 corridor access. He told Wynne to find him everything she could about who else might be on the station with an interest in 11-year-old relay technicians and their luggage. Then he looked at Dale. Second try, he said. Different approach. You're not a thief this time. You're a concerned young man who noticed a tired old traveler and wanted to help him carry his bag. He saw my face. He saw a face. We're going to change what the face communicates. He reached into his coat and produced a Varric staff badge, the kind that maintenance workers wore, that allowed passage through secondary corridors. Your infrastructure now. Humble. Helpful. Not worth looking at twice. Dale turned the badge over in his hands. Where did you get this? I get a lot of things. The badge was real. He could tell by the way the biometric layer responded to his body heat, a faint warmth, a flicker of light along the edge. Real, or good enough to function. With Marin, the distinction was sometimes unclear, and Dale had stopped asking. He approached Vasic differently, this time. No angle, no arc, just straight and direct. Clipping a pair of transit forms to a slate he'd borrowed from Wynne. Moving with the particular distracted purpose of someone who had too many tasks and not enough time. Sir, I need to verify your transit documentation. Vasic looked up, and the look on his face was interesting. Not the flat wariness of before, but something more complicated. He looked at Dale for a long moment, and Dale held very still and let him look. You were here earlier, Vasic said. Sir, your hand. He nodded at Dale's left hand, where the scar ran along the palm. I saw it when you reached for the case. You've got a scar in that same shape. Burns, maybe? Old ones. He looked at Dale's face again. Why are you wearing maintenance livery? Dale stood at the edge of a decision. He had several options, all of them tactical, all of them dishonest. He chose the one he hadn't planned for. Because the man who sent me to take your case has better resources than I do, he said quietly. And I'm trying to figure out if there's a version of this situation where you and I don't end up making his day. Vasic was silent for a long moment. Sit down, he said. The old man had been a relay architect. Before the Varric, before the occupation, he had spent 20 years designing the systems that made instantaneous transit possible, the mathematical frameworks, the phase calibration, the safeguards that prevented a human being from being disassembled and lost. He talked about it the way people talk about lost countries, with a kind of precise grief. When they took over the network, he said, they kept the infrastructure but they changed the destination tables. Everything connects to everything, but what it connects to is theirs now. You can go anywhere in the transit network. You just can't go home. Can't the codes be changed back? Vasic looked at the case. That's what I've been trying to find out. He wouldn't open it there. Dale didn't push. Instead, he sat with the old man for a few minutes, both of them watching the atrium, the slow churn of the lockdown, the Varric security detail moving in their patient geometric patterns. Your friends, Vasic said. They'll try again. Yes. And the other man, the nervous one with the book. Him too. And the Varric will get to me eventually, once they've processed enough of the queue. He was quiet for a moment. I need to get off this station. The ferry's down. The ferry is one way off. He looked at Dale steadily. You know this station. Not the way you do. No. But you know the parts they don't monitor. He paused. What do you actually want? Not your employer. You. The question landed somewhere Dale hadn't expected. He thought about the transit bays. The violet light, the destination tables that led everywhere except anywhere you'd want to go. He thought about since the occupation had been finalized. The slow process of learning to breathe recycled air and look at the floor and call yourself a processing zone. I want the exit to go somewhere, he said. Vasek nodded slowly, like that was the answer he'd needed to hear. The plan came apart in the 5th hour. It wasn't Marin's patience that broke. Marin had excellent patience, almost architectural in its stability. It was Rhett. The nervous man with the book had apparently decided that waiting was no longer viable, and he moved on Vasek while Dale was across the atrium talking to Wynne. And when Dale looked up, the old man was standing with his hands very carefully at his sides, and Rhett was close to him. Too close. With the angle of someone who has a weapon they haven't shown yet. Dale moved. He didn't run. Running attracted Varric attention, but he moved with the kind of focused speed that looks like urgency, without looking like panic, and he was threading through the crowd before his conscious mind had finished processing the situation. Just hand me the case, Rhett was saying, very quietly, and we walk away from this and I don't have to. Hey, Dale put himself between them, facing Rhett, his back to Vasek. He kept his voice low and pleasant. Everything okay here? Walk away, Rhett. I'm afraid I can't do that. He smiled. It was the smile he'd learned from watching Marin. The one that communicated friendliness and something beneath friendliness that was harder to read. You're standing about 8 meters from a Varric scanner array. If you move your hand in a way that registers on the threat index, you're going to have a very bad next 30 seconds. Rhett's eyes moved. He looked. The scanner array was there, exactly where Dale had said it was, sweeping its slow arc. Whatever he promised you, Dale said. It's not worth a Varric detention. You don't know what he promised. I know enough about how this works. A beat of silence. The scanner swept. Rhett's jaw worked. The case, he said, contains the relay recalibration data, the full destination architecture, the routing tables, the phase keys. Everything you'd need to reopen the network to surface destinations. His voice had changed. The intensity was still there, but something else had entered it. Something that sounded like desperation. I was sent here by people on the surface. There are 12 resistance cells that have been waiting 3 years for that data. If we can recalibrate the relay network, even 2 bays, just 2, we can extract people, we can get children out. He looked at Dale. I'm not your enemy. Dale looked at him for a long moment. Then he looked back at Vasek. Vasek said nothing, but the look on his face was the look of someone who had been carrying something alone for a very long time, and was deciding whether the road ahead was short or shared. Come with me, Dale said. Both of you now. They found Marin's situation already deteriorating when they reached the table. Wynne had her device and was actively routing through secondary nodes. Kale was watching the security detail with the focus of someone counting beats. Thilo was not at the table. Sura was, but her expression was wrong, tight in the way it got when she'd absorbed a piece of information she hadn't integrated yet. Marin looked at Dale, then at Vasek, then at Rhett. I told you to bring me the case, he said. I brought you better than the case. Dale sat down. I brought you context. I don't need context. You need to decide whether you're a thief or something else, and you need to decide it in the next few minutes, because the Varric security sweep is going to be at this section of the atrium in about 40 minutes, and once it gets here, everything we have becomes evidence. He met Marin's eyes. What's in that case, if it works, can reopen transit to the surface. Real transit, not the Varric network. The silence at the table was a specific kind of silence, the kind that forms when a group of people simultaneously update their model of the situation. Marin was quiet for a long time. Wynne, he said finally. The maintenance schematics are pulled, she said. There's an emergency transit bay. Bay 0, the old engineers called it. Built into the original station architecture before the Varric took over. It's not on the Varric network maps because it predates the network maps. It connects to a surface relay that the Varric decommissioned. She paused. Or thought they did. Could it be brought online, Vasek asked. With the right data, Wynne said. Vasek looked at the case. He looked around the table, at Marin, who was calculating, at Kale, who was unreadable, at Rhett, who was watching him with 11 years of desperate waiting in his eyes. He looked at Dale. The data is incomplete, he said. That's why I couldn't get Varec clearance to the home system. The only copy of the full routing tables is there. What I have is the phase calibration sequence. The surface relay, if it's functional, would supply the destination table automatically if it received a valid calibration signal. He opened the case. Inside were marbles, or something that looked like marbles. Dozens of small crystalline spheres, each about the size of a thumb joint, each containing something luminescent that shifted and moved like something alive. They clinked softly against each other when the case tilted, and the sound they made was unexpectedly delicate for something with 11 years of compressed urgency inside it. Phase storage cells, Vasek said. Each one contains a portion of the calibration sequence. Individually, they're meaningless. Assembled in the right order, they form the signal. He looked up. I've been memorizing the order for 3 years. Marin picked up one of the spheres. He held it in the transit atrium light, and the luminescence inside it moved toward his warmth, the way a plant moves toward sun. How long to set it up? He asked. At Bay 0, if the Varec decommissioning was superficial and the physical infrastructure is intact, maybe 90 minutes, maybe less. Marin set the sphere down. He looked at Dale with an expression Dale had never seen on him before. Not the calculating warmth, not the layered performance of authority. Something more simply human which sat on his face like a visitor. All right, he said, let's go. Getting Thilo back was the first problem. He was in the secondary corridor near Bay 11, running his own small scheme that Marin apparently hadn't been told about. A dice game he'd been running for 2 hours with 6 transit workers, none of whom were particularly pleased when Marin arrived to end it. The second problem was the Varec patrol rotation, which had accelerated since the 3rd hour. The third problem was the security door that separated the public atrium from the maintenance levels, which was locked by a code that had been changed. This code was changed, Wynne said at the door panel. I thought you said. I said most of the codes hadn't been updated. This one was. She was already doing something to the panel's edge, her thumbnail working at the casing with the focused attention of someone who has spent a lot of time learning the inside of things. Give me 3 minutes. She got it in 2. The maintenance levels were dim and smelled of metal and of the Varec processing chemicals more strongly than the atrium did. No recycled oxygen hospitality down here, just the functional core of the station, pipe runs and cable channels, and the low constant vibration of the transit array doing its work. Their footsteps didn't echo so much as they absorbed into the material of the place, swallowed. Vasek navigated. He knew the station the way you know a house you helped build. Not by reading the maps, but by the memory in your hands, the sense of where things ought to be before you see them. He moved through the maintenance levels with something that wasn't quite confidence, because confidence would have implied a plan that was working, and the plan was still mostly a decision to keep moving. What he had was specificity. He knew exactly where he was going, and that was nearly the same thing. Bay 0 was at the end of a corridor that had been sealed with a Varec closure panel. Composite material, stamped with their bureaucratic ideograms. The kind of thing that was meant to communicate that this door had been considered, and found unworthy of further consideration. Rhett put his hand on it. Step back, Vasek said, and opened the case and sorted through the phase cells with practiced hands until he found one in particular. He held it against the closure panel for several seconds, and the luminescence inside it changed color, shifted from its shifting blue to something warmer, something that pulsed twice like a slow heartbeat, and the panel unsealed. It reads as a maintenance access, Vasek said, seeing their faces. The phase cells contain encoded credentials as well as calibration data. I built both. The bay on the other side was intact. That was the thing that hit first, the intactness of it. The Varec had sealed the door and filed the paperwork and moved on, and behind that paperwork the station had just continued being what it was. The transit array was dark, the surfaces coated with 11 years of undisturbed dust, but the architecture was solid. The emitter array, the phase alignment grid, the buffer matrix that would receive the calibration signal. Vasek walked to the primary interface panel and ran his hand along its edge, and something in his posture changed, settled maybe, like a key entering a lock. It's functional, he said quietly, or close enough. There was no time for the 90 minutes he'd estimated. The Varec security sweep was above them in the atrium. Wynn's receiver was tracking their scanner array, and the signal was moving toward their position. 30 minutes, maybe 35. What happened in that time? Vasek opened the phase cells and began assembling them in the sequence only he knew. Wynne connected her device to the bay's secondary systems and began running diagnostics, learning the infrastructure by feel, patching errors as they surfaced. Rhett and Kale went back through the maintenance corridor to run interference, slowing the Varrock sweep down not by engaging it, which was suicidal, but by the quieter methods of closed valves and rerouted power draws, and a minor fire alarm in a section of the station that had nothing worth alarming about, all of which the Varrock would investigate methodically and at length, because method was what they were. Marin stood at the door and watched the corridor and said nothing. Sura stood behind him. Thilo was somewhere further back, running his own calculation about distance and exits, which was Thilo's perpetual occupation. Dale was with Vasek. He didn't know the technical work. He had nothing to contribute to the phase assembly, nothing useful to say about buffer matrices or calibration signals. What he did was stand there, at the old man's right side in the specific way that you stand with someone who has been carrying something alone. Close enough to matter, not so close as to crowd. He handed Vasek things when Vasek reached for them. He held the phase cell case when both of Vasek's hands were occupied. He was present in the way that presence is sometimes the only thing that helps. His thumbnail found his palm scar again. He let it rest there. 19 minutes in, the interface panel lit. Not fully. Not with the violet transit light of the active bays. A lower color, something between amber and white. Something that looked less like a machine and more like something remembering how to breathe. Vasek stood back and looked at it, and the look on his face was the specific combination of grief and relief that accompanies the recovery of things you'd stopped letting yourself expect to find. Calibration signal is forming, Wynne said from her panel. The surface relay, it's responding. It's been in low-power maintenance mode. Someone down there kept it running. 11 years, Rhett said from the doorway. He'd come back. His voice was very quiet. 11 years, Vasek agreed. How long to full transit capability, Dale asked. Base 0, at power, 2 hours, maybe 3. Vasek looked at him. But a valid signal, a calibration handshake with the surface relay. That's already done. Anyone on the surface with the right equipment can read this signal and confirm the phase key. They can work from the bottom. They don't need us to do the whole job. You're giving them the starting point, Dale said. The equation. Vasek closed the case, which was mostly empty now. The phase cells arranged around the interface panel in their precise sequence, their luminescence steady and synchronized. The rest is mathematics. It took me 3 years to solve it working alone, in secret, with the Varrock watching. There are people on the surface who are very motivated and considerably less alone. Marin appeared in the doorway. The sweep is 17 minutes out. We need to think about leaving. What happens to you? Dale asked Vasek. I need to stay here. Keep the signal stable during the handshake. He looked at Dale with those clear, tired eyes. I've been on this station for 4 days. Before that, 11 years in the network. I've been trying to get home for 11 years. He almost smiled. I'm a relay technician. This is what I built. It's appropriate that I'm the one who maintains it. They'll find you. Eventually. But eventually is time. And time is what the surface needs. He looked around the bay at the lit interface, the assembled phase cells, the amber-white glow. Go. Dale stood still for a moment. His hand was on his scarred palm, his thumb in the groove of the old wound. He thought about the transit bays upstairs, their violet light, their destination tables that led everywhere except home. He thought about 11 years of learning to breathe recycled air. He thought about a man who had spent that same time, alone, solving an equation. He thought, that's human. Not the victory, not the solution, the 11 years, the refusal to stop working on it. He thought, I'm going to tell someone about this. Thank you, he said. Don't thank me, Vasek said. Tell them what it's like when it opens. I've never been able to go back. They came out through a maintenance access on the station's secondary level, which connected to a cargo staging area that connected to a service lift that Wynne had quietly commandeered from a Varrock logistics rotation. The lift brought them to a bay level that the security sweep hadn't reached. They filed through the cargo corridor with the specific unhurried purposes of people who belonged there. Maintenance badges, handheld slates, the language of infrastructure. No one looked at them twice. In the atrium above, the security sweep was moving through its patient patterns. The scanner arrays were reading biometrics, processing humans in their long, slow queue, marking the transit chips of those cleared, and the faces of those who'd drawn secondary review. The Varrock security detail was operating with the precision it always operated with, thoroughgoing and methodical, and absolutely certain that it had seen everything worth seeing. It had not seen a man in a sealed basement bay, surrounded by crystalline spheres that were singing a signal down through 1,000 kilometers of orbital space to a surface relay that had been running on low power for 11 years waiting. The ferry came back online 2 hours later. The lockdown lifted. The Varric announcement came through in its synthesized tones. Security review complete. Transit operations resumed. Thank you for your cooperation. And the atrium breathed out collectively, and the cues reformed, and the violet light pulsed in its slow rhythm. Dale stood at the edge of Bay 11 and watched people flow toward the bays. He watched them hold out their transit chips. He watched the Varric processors check the chips against the destination tables, and he watched the destination tables list their options. Varric Prime, Station 9, Processing Shahab Kellen, Relay Delta. And none of those options were Earth, and none of them were Sydney, and none of them were home. Not yet. But below them, 11 stories down through the guts of the station, in a sealed bay that smelled of dust and 11 years, and an old man's particular kind of faith, a signal was singing. And far below that, on a planet that had been called a processing zone for long enough that some people had started to forget what they'd called it before, something was listening. Wynne appeared at his shoulder. She looked at the transit bays for a moment, the violet light, the long queues. How long do you think, she asked. He said 2 hours to 3 for full capability. But it's not just us anymore, she nodded. They stood there, a moment watching the Varric atrium do its efficient work, processing its 10,000 humans through the architecture that had been built to contain them. I've been on this station for 7 years, Wynne said. I don't know if I remember what trees smell like. Wet, Dale said. After rain, and then underneath that, something else. Something I don't have a word for anymore. She was quiet for a moment. Do you think it actually works? He thought about the amber-white glow. He thought about phase cells singing in sequence. Mathematical precision, assembled in a basement with 12 minutes to spare. He thought about a surface relay, humming with low power for 11 years in the dark, waiting for a signal that someone had promised it was coming. Yeah, he said. I think it actually works. It started at Bay 6. Not the full transit capability that Vasic had described. Not the rerouted destination tables. Not the transit corridors reopened to surface coordinates. That came later. What started at Bay 6 was a sound. A secondary tone beneath the primary transit sequence. Something that the Varric system diagnostic flagged as an equipment variance and logged for maintenance review and otherwise did not understand, because the Varric had excellent pattern recognition for the patterns they had built and poor pattern recognition for the patterns they hadn't. The variance was a signal handshake. The surface relay, receiving the calibration sequence from Bay 0, had confirmed the phase key and was transmitting back the surface side component of the routing table. 11 years of mathematics, solved from 2 directions simultaneously, meeting somewhere in the middle. In the maintenance log, it looked like noise. On the surface below, it looked like a door opening. Marin found out 2 days later, in the way that Marin found things out, through channels that he maintained carefully and compensated well. He found Dale in the concourse, and sat across from him, and ordered coffee and was quiet for a while. They're saying 6 transit bays recalibrated in the first 48 hours, he said. Surface coordinates. The Varric are calling it a network anomaly. I heard. They haven't found Bay 0 yet. No. The old man? Dale shook his head carefully. He didn't know, and not knowing was its own kind of answer. And he'd had 2 days to practice the expression that communicated that some questions you hold without resolving, because to resolve them prematurely is to cheat the holding. Marin drank his coffee. He looked at the transit bays across the atrium. The violet light pulsed. Rhett's group extracted 43 people in the first night, he said. Children, mostly. Medical cases. The kind of cases that you can't be quiet about. Dale nodded. Not bad, Marin said, for a job where no one got paid. He almost smiled. It was the genuine version, smaller than the operational one, and less impressive and more real. Next time I give you a simple task and you don't do it, I'm going to need a very specific accounting of what you did instead. I brought you better than the case, Dale said. You did, Marin set down his cup. The problem with better is that it makes the next case impossible to be satisfied with. He stood, smoothed his coat, looked at Dale with something that might have been respect. Don't be late. He walked back into the crowd and was gone. Dale sat alone with his coffee and his scar and the sound of the transit atrium doing its work around him. The cues and the announcements and the violet light, and the 10,000 daily calculations of people figuring out how to live inside something that had been built to contain them. He watched Bay 6. He watched a woman approach the transit array with her chip held out, and he watched the processor check it, and he watched the destination table load, and among the destinations, Varric Prime Station 9, Processing Hub Kellen, Relay Delta. There was something new. A coordinate, surface designation, one of 6 so far and growing. The woman looked at the destination table for a long time. The queue behind her shifted, impatient. She reached out and selected the surface coordinate. The transit array sang its note. The violet light pulsed, steadied, and she stepped into it, and she went home. Dale watched until the light resolved. He finished his coffee. He put the cup down and looked at his palm. The scar, the old cut, the mark of the first time he'd reached for something and paid for it. He closed his hand. Outside the station's exterior observation panel, 1/2 kilometer of vacuum separated the structure from the curve of the planet below. That blue-white arc, the surface of the only world that had ever smelled like something he couldn't quite name anymore. Rain and something underneath rain. Something he was going to have to go all the way back to remember. He'd have to think about that. He'd have to think about what it meant to have grown up in a holding pattern. Years spent among people who were waiting to stop waiting. And to have been in the right basement on the right day when the equation finally closed. He didn't think he'd done anything remarkable. He'd stood next to an old man. He'd carried a case. He'd said, "I want the exit to go somewhere." That was all. That was enough. The transit bays pulsed their violet light. The queues moved forward. Somewhere below them, in the dark of Bay 0, crystalline spheres continued their quiet song, assembling the mathematics of an open door, one calibration pulse at a time. Dale stood up. He walked to the queue.